Well, it's certainly been a while since I've done a horror film countdown. Last time we looked at some underrated slasher films. Not only was that video well received despite all the corny jokes I made, but I got a lot of really good suggestions for a follow-up video which I still plan on getting to. But for now, we're going to be putting away our kitchen knives and loading our shotguns, because today, we're going to be heading into zombie territory. Zombie films are historic within the horror genre. Many point to the 1968 George Romero film Night of the Living Dead as being the film that ultimately popularized zombie films and would serve as the framework for further installments into the subgenre. My first real exposure to what a zombie was back in the early 2000s when I popped in a copy of Resident Evil 2. Now keep in mind, this was the first time I had ever played a Resident Evil game, and I was maybe 10, 11 years old back then, so I didn't know what the hell I was doing. And needless to say, I watched Leon get devoured by the undead. So that horrifying experience pretty much sparked my interest in zombies. So whenever my family would take our weekly trip to the local Blockbuster, I always ended up browsing through the horror section for a good zombie movie to watch. Man, those were different times. For this countdown, I tried to pick some of the lesser known zombie titles out there that I personally enjoy. So hopefully I give you guys some good recommendations to check out. And I would also like to hear what some of your favorite zombie films are. Leave your picks down below in the comment section, and who knows, maybe they'll end up in a future video. So without any further delay, here are 6 underrated zombie films that you should watch. Number 6. The Beyond. Also known as Seven Doors of Death, The Beyond is a 1981 Italian film directed by Lucio Fulci, a name that will be appearing on this list more than once. The Beyond was shot in the New Orleans area in late 1980 and was released internationally in 1981, but didn't see a theatrical release in the United States until 1983. Additionally, renowned film director Quentin Tarantino would acquire the rights to this movie and would re-release it in 1998 through Grindhouse. The Beyond's plot is a bit hard to follow upon first viewing. It centers around a young woman named Liza, who's in the process of renovating the Seven Doors Hotel. Strange occurrences begin happening around the property, and Liza eventually encounters a mysterious blind woman named Emily, who warns her that trying to reopen the hotel is a mistake. A malevolent force awakens in the hotel, which in turn reanimates the dead. The zombies in this movie are a symptom of a supernatural anomaly, meaning that this isn't your typical apocalyptic virus freak show. Nevertheless, the zombies in this movie look great, which is always important to get right for a zombie flick. In fact, the makeup and practical effects all around are spectacular, especially for a low-budget film. Now, I do enjoy this movie, but there are a few things that did bother me. The pacing seems to be all over the place. Some parts go by way too fast, and others crawl at a snail's pace. The acting is not the greatest, but if you're familiar with some of these old Italian films, you know that's par for the course. What I found more distracting was the awful overdubbing job. It usually doesn't bother me that much, but in this film, it's hard not to notice.
I'm sure you'll be okay on your own. I'll be out till, I don't know, 1 or a quarter of. You feel completely at home now, you hear?
Have a happy lunch.
Thank you.
See what I mean? The last thing I'll point out needs a bit of a setup. Towards the end of this movie, Liza and John are trying to escape a hospital that has been overrun by the undead. John happens to have a revolver, and you would think that he would have figured out by shooting them in the head is the only way to destroy them, because he does manage to down a few of them with some headshots. But he goes right back to shooting them in the chest in the next scene, and it's annoying. Despite its flaws, this movie is definitely worth checking out. If you want to take a break from watching stuff on Netflix and are looking for a good, trippy, gore-infested zombie movie to sink your teeth into, look no further than The Beyond. Number 5. Dead Snow. Dead Snow is a 2009 Norwegian film directed by Tommy Wirkola, and I'm sorry if I'm getting that last name wrong. A group of medical students on vacation arrive at a small cabin near Oxford in Norway. The group begins to drink and party until a mysterious hiker shows up and asks them for a cup of coffee. The man then tells a cryptic story about how Nazis used to occupy these mountains during the Second World War. The hiker warns the group that there is an evil in these mountains that they do not want to awaken, then takes his leave. The next morning, Vigard sets out to look for his girlfriend Sarah, who still hasn't shown up. Vigard discovers the body of the hiker who visited them the night before, and begins to worry that his girlfriend has met a similar fate. Meanwhile, back in the cabin, the group has discovered a box of Nazi treasure. They decide not to mess with it until Vigard returns. However, that plan doesn't last, as later on they're seen messing around with the contents of the box while drinking. The group is then attacked by a battalion of undead soldiers of the Third Reich. Now trapped and surrounded, the group must gather any weapons that they can find and fight their way to freedom. It's evident that the filmmakers were heavily inspired by other movies like Evil Dead, and it definitely has that same kind of comedic vibe to it. But I personally feel that this movie should have taken itself seriously from start to finish. There are some genuinely suspenseful scenes in this picture, but it all builds up to this goofy, over-the-top, blood-soaked showdown between the main characters and the Nazi zombies. But it's still fun to watch. If you're looking for a fun, cheesy, over-the-top movie that doesn't take its own premise that seriously, then I would recommend Dead Snow. Just don't expect a masterpiece. Number 4. Zombie. Now this movie has a few alternate titles. It's also known as Zombie 2, Zombie Flesh Eaters, and Island of the Living Dead. It was originally released in 1979 and was directed by Lucio Fulci. Supposedly, this movie was adapted from a screenplay that was meant to be a sequel to George A. Romero's Dawn of the Dead. The film begins with an abandoned boat sailing adrift into the New York harbor. A chopper takes notice and informs law enforcement. 2 police officers board the seemingly deserted vessel and begin to investigate. One of the cops heads down into the boat's cabin, and shortly after is attacked by a zombie. The zombie emerges from the boat's cabin and begins to make its way towards the other officer. The other officer draws his gun and shouts for him to stop, but is forced to shoot, and the zombie plummets into the water. The police question the boat's owner's daughter, Ann Bowles, who claims that she hasn't had contact with her father for months. Ann hooks up with a reporter named Peter, both figuratively and literally, and together they decide to follow her father's footsteps to the Caribbean island of Matul. They were lucky enough to hitch a boat ride with an American couple who happened to be taking a tour of the islands. On the island of Matul, the natives are dying of an unexplained illness, and there have been rumors of people rising from the dead. This movie is one of Fulci's best. Like with The Beyond, the makeup in this movie looks amazing. I'd even go as far as to say the zombies in this movie look better than what you'll see in most modern films. The overdubbing is noticeable, but I would say it's nowhere near as distracting as it was in The Beyond. Zombie ranks up there with the classics. Definitely check this one out if you're unfamiliar. Also keep in mind that this movie was made in the 1970s, so you don't have to worry about any tacky CGI effects. Number 3. Brain Dead. Also known as Dead Alive, Brain Dead is a 1992 horror comedy directed by Peter Jackson. Yes, the same Peter Jackson who directed the Lord of the Rings and Hobbit movies. Before he became a renowned film director with the backing of Big Studio, he wrote and directed low-budget exploitation films such as Bad Taste and Meet the Feebles. The story begins in 1957. An explorer named Stuart McAlden and his team have captured a Sumatran rat monkey, a strange hybrid creature that resulted from plague-carrying rats raping a monkey. No, I'm not making that up. Stuart is bitten by the creature and is quickly killed by his own crew. The captured rat monkey is then shipped to the Wellington Zoo in New Zealand. In Wellington, Lionel Cosgrove lives in a Victorian mansion with his overprotective mother, Vera. You get to know these characters a bit and learn that Lionel is controlled by his mommy and lacks any kind of self-confidence. Lionel falls in love with a local shoekeeper's daughter named Paquita. The two visit the Wellington Zoo together on a date, and Vera follows them. While spying on her son, Vera is bitten by the rat monkey from earlier, and though she appears to be fine at first, the following day she grows more and more decrepit, and she eventually turns into the undead. Lionel does his best to try to keep her locked away safely in the basement, but her repeated escapes end up turning most of the neighbors into the Walking Dead. Lionel's Uncle Les discovers the zombies in the basement, which he mistakes for actual corpses. He then blackmails his nephew into giving up the house and his inheritance. He then invites a few of his friends over for a housewarming party. Bequita convinces Lionel to poison the zombies in the basement to put them out of their misery. However, the poison he gives them is actually an animal stimulant and ends up making them stronger than they were before. The zombies then break free from the basement and begin to attack the partygoers. This movie is a full-on balls-to-the-wall insane shit show, full of blood and guts, gross-out humor, and is just fucking crazy.
I kick ass for the Lord!
Peter Rainer of the Los Angeles Times pretty much sums up my thoughts of this movie. It is the most hilariously disgusting movie ever made. It makes something like The Reanimator seem like a documentary about Mother Teresa. And that, folks, pretty much sums up this film in a nutshell. If you decide to watch this movie, I do not recommend that you eat while watching. And even if you take my advice, you should keep a barf bag next to you anyway. Number 2. Night of the Living Dead. As mentioned in the beginning of this video, Night of the Living Dead is a classic zombie film, and is definitely one that played a major role in pioneering the zombie film genre. This film has been sequeled and remade several times, but you can go ahead and ignore all the remakes aside from this one. Trust me, you're not missing out on any quality filmmaking. However, the first remake of the movie in 1990, directed by Tom Savini, is a different story. Barbara and her brother Johnny visit their mother's grave in a remote cemetery in Pennsylvania. During their visit, Barbara is attacked by a deranged man. Her brother tries to defend her, but is killed when his head bashes against a gravestone. Barbara wrecks her car while fleeing the cemetery, and is chased to what appears to be an abandoned farmhouse. She takes shelter there, only to find that the house is also infested with the undead. Shortly after, a man named Ben pulls up in a pickup truck. The two team up and clear the house of zombies. Other survivors who have been hiding emerge from the cellar. The group is divided over what their next course of action should be. Harry Cooper, who's a selfish, argumentative asshole, along with his wife Helen, and their sick daughter decide to stay locked up in the cellar. The rest of the group decide to stay in the house and try to survive the night. This film features one of my all-time favorite actors, Tony Todd. It has the same plot as the original 1968 film for the most part, but things play out slightly different this time around. The most noticeable change is in the character of Barbara. In the original film, this character spends most of their time in a state of psychosis, completely traumatized by the situation. However, in this version, it's refreshing to see her actually fight back against the dead, and doesn't spend the entire movie sobbing in the fetal position. I feel that this film is often overlooked. It's well shot, well executed, and stays true to its source material. As much respect as I have for the original 1968 film, I actually prefer this version. Number 1. Shockwaves. Also known as Almost Human and Deathcore, Shockwaves is a low-budget 1977 horror film written and directed by Ken Wiederhorn and features the legendary Peter Cushing. The crew of a small commercial boat carrying a group of tourists are having trouble with the vessel's engine. The passengers on board sense that something is wrong, but are reassured by the boat's grumpy captain that everything is under control. During the night, a massive ship suddenly appears out of nowhere and sideswipes their boat. The captain sends up a flare, which momentarily reveals the sight of a huge decaying vessel that is wrecked off the coast of a nearby tropical island. It appears to have been there for decades. The next morning, everyone wakes up to find that the captain is missing. Realizing the boat is slowly taking in water, the remaining crew evacuates everyone to the island. The group is horrified to find the body of the captain, who apparently drowned while he was checking the underside of the boat for damage. Now stranded on the island, the group discovers a large run-down, seemingly abandoned hotel. However, they discover a reclusive old man living there, who becomes alarmed to hear that an old massive vessel, the Protorus, has been spotted just outside the island. The mysterious man is a former SS officer who once commanded a group of an elite Nazi squad known as the Death Corps, a group of pathological murderers and sadists who were modified to be the ultimate killing machines. Many years ago, after the war was lost, the officer sank the Patoris, along with the onboard death core, to the bottom of the ocean. And now, after all these years, the ship has returned, bringing with it the squad of murderous undead Nazis. I had somewhat low expectations going into this movie. I asked myself, how good could a low-budget zombie film from the 70s possibly be? But I figured that Lucio Fulci's Zombie is exactly that, so I decided to give it a shot. And let me just say that this is one of the best zombie films I've ever seen. Its cold, haunting atmosphere helps make the story more compelling. The undead Nazi soldiers aren't your typical mindless zombies. They are stealthy, cold-blooded killing machines who stalk their prey and wait for the right moment to strike. I was genuinely surprised of how good this film actually is, and I highly recommend that you check out this underrated classic, and you can thank me later. Hey guys, I hope you enjoyed the video. Please leave your thoughts and comments down below, and don't forget to tell me what some of your favorite zombie films are. And if you're new to the channel, be sure to hit subscribe so you don't miss out on any future content. As always, I'm your Uncle Unit, and I'll catch you next time.